Tim Donner, John Clark, Dave Patterson, and Lisa K. Donner. And this is all about the Kennedy announcement this afternoon to suspend campaign activities. So let's start with you, Tim. Kennedy, he did not hold back on why he was trying to slay the Democratic Party dragon, and he was kind of tough.
Well, I'll tell you what, just the story of anybody named Kennedy, a scion of the Kennedy clan of Joseph Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, Ted Kennedy, and all the other Kennedys who have always been Democrats, to see this son of Robert F. Kennedy endorse not just a Republican, but a Republican who is repulsive to most Democrats. And he has good reason for it. I couldn't help but think back to the clever, at least they thought so, Democratic strategy of legal warfare, lawfare, and what it did to Trump. It may have been that Trump would never have boosted his candidacy were it not for the backfiring legal warfare that Democrats conducted against him, which actually backfired so badly it put Trump in the lead. Likewise, the chickens are coming home to roost on what they did to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to keep him out of this race. Mm-hmm. They sued him. They tried to kick him off the ballot. They ridiculed him. They brought the rest of his family in to bow to Joe Biden and the rest of the Democrats. And by the way, that was not all the Kennedys. There were Kennedys that supported RFK Jr., but this is an embarrassment for the Democratic Party, no question. And in the calculus of who this helps electorally, of course, the conventional wisdom is that this will help Trump more than Harris, of course, because the endorsement makes that even more likely. But if you look at the Kennedy numbers, at one point he was about at 20%, as high as 25%. Now he's down in the 5% range. Now you have to figure that loss of 10, 15% is mostly among Democrats going home to the party, particularly with Harris, which means the ones that are left are likely truly independent and therefore more likely to be swayed towards Trump than if RFK Jr. had not endorsed. So this is big. This is very big. It changes the race.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I was on social media just watching all this unfold, and some of his most current sites there's a conservatives and independents for Kennedy site that I visit, or that I'm actually part of, to hear the news of what they have to say. And they are all saying, oh, we love Kennedy and we will follow him where he goes. And they trust him. They think he's the honest guy in the race, the most honest guy in the race. And if he is willing to align himself to join Trump on some issues, obviously not all issues, but that's a good thing for these people. Nobody's saying, oh, well, I'm going to go vote for Harris now. Not a one of them. They're disappointed that he's suspending activities, but they're not upset about him at all.
That's why I think Tim's insight, sorry, Lisa, is that's right, is very accurate. And I hadn't thought about that the drop in the points probably are leaning towards a loss of Democrats, thus leaving independents and Republicans there. And his excoriating indictment of the Democrats leads him to be the third. This is quite unusual. He's the third Democrat to have been jettisoned. There's such a thing as an Obama-Trump voter. There's such a thing Bernie Trump voters, and now there are Kennedy Trump voters. The way they've been treated, as you say, Tim, is the same way that Donald Trump has been treated. And this strikes me, and you look at the comments as they spoke, even on ABC or other places, they were predominantly angry Americans tired of being lied to by the mainstream media. You've lied about everything, and now you lie about lawfare in this bizarre thing that you're labeling as justice against Trump, and now you've got a Democrat in your sights. And the contrast, too, is between past third-party runs like Ross Perot and Ron Paul, where they were actually in the polls. Actually, the mainstream media acknowledged them. Look what's been done to this man and what he's doing now to just call out the corruption in the Democratic Party. This is a Kennedy. You rejected him. And what did he say his three points were that he agreed with on Trump? The disease crisis, the Ukraine crisis, and free speech. Those are big issues right now. He calls them the existential issues over which America will now bond together. This is incredibly unprecedented and unusual, and we're all trying to fathom it, I think. Thank you. Lisa, you were going to say.
Well, it was a damning indictment of the Democrats. It was. It called them the party of continual war, the party who wanted to weaponize government agencies against their own people, the American people. He likened the Democratic Party to the Russian political party.
Right.
That's pretty damning. And he was really treated unfairly. He seemed, like he wouldn't mind going on a couple of different networks to, I don't know why would it have been so horrible for him to show up on a couple of different networks, but they just froze him out. And, when you make an enemy in politics, it can come back to bite you.
Well, you can't let a smart guy like Kennedy speak. You can't let that message out, because the sheep they're not gonna know what to do with that.
Yeah, and Sarah, he was also damning of Kamala Harris, that he tried to meet with her.
Yeah.
And
that spoke volumes.
She shut him down, and he said all that she's running against is hating Donald Trump.
She said, who needs policy when you can just hate Trump?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the full quote, I think, from the whole thing. I put together, we like to be able to simplify the message of any particular candidate. So I put it down to 4 C's. The reason that Kennedy is leaving the Democratic Party. And yes, sure, there's a grudge because of the way they treated him. That's true. But he provided legitimate reasons for his leaving the Democratic Party. I put it to 4 C's: censorship, cancel culture, corruption, corporations, corporate tyranny, the corruption of a central government that not just allows but fosters censorship. It can cancel people like Robert F. Kennedy. And so there you go, the 4 C's: censorship, cancel culture, corruption, corporations. That's what he specifically was complaining about the Democratic Party. And I think it was helpful, too, that he did a beat test the Democratic Party in 1960 and what his father and his uncle and his other uncle and almost every other Kennedy stood for back then, which included, by the way, a strong defense. John F. Kennedy passed a massive tax cut in the early 1960s and unleashed great prosperity and growth with it. Can you imagine any Democrat cutting taxes today?
Well, and that the original Kennedys that made the Democratic Party famous and young and energetic, they were very strong supporters of a secure border. They had friends, Bobby Kennedy and Cesar Chavez were friends. They were buddies. And Cesar Chavez would say, you got to close the border because me and my people who are Americans, that we are naturalized. We are Americans. We were either born here or we came here and we did it the right way. are getting our jobs taken away from us. And the Kennedys were very big on immigration. So that's got to be another point for them, for Trump and RFK Jr. to kind of merge into.
Well, establishing this unity party, it really changes the race.
Yeah,
It
I
does,
like it.
because Kennedy gets essentially 5% of the vote right now. You got to figure 80% of that 5% goes to Trump. That is definitely a difference maker in the swing states. And it was interesting. I thought it was very clever that what Kennedy said was he'll keep his name on the ballot in blue states and red states where the race is largely determined already, and
Right.
just take his name off in about 10 states that are
is
up for
clever.
grabs.
That is
What do you
clever.
think of that strategy, Dave?
No, I think that's an excellent strategy. And what that says is that what he said was he doesn't want to become the spoiler.
Right. And he's making good on that.
Yeah,
Right.
And by doing this, he is not a spoiler. The other thing that I think that he said, it's in a nuance of campaigning, but he made a very specific point of saying he's suspending his campaign. He's not ending it. He's not terminating his campaign, because if he terminated his campaign, he could no longer get any contributions to a campaign that doesn't exist. So
Correct.
he has to keep his campaign open in order to pay his bills. And so that's why when people drop out of races, they never end their,
Right.
they always suspend them.
Always suspend.
And
As a matter of fact, I think that John Clark, the last time he ran, he suspended his campaign without ever ending it. So I think he's still
Are you still a
actually
candidate, Clark? Are you
He's still a candidate
candidate
for the last position he ran for.
No, I lost.
But you never withdrew. You only suspended.
I spoke the truth.
So
lost on it.
there's another aspect to this that I think is particularly useful for Donald Trump. All of the things that Donald Trump has been saying about the Democratic Party, the democratic process, all of those things they call hoaxes and conspiracy theories, he doesn't have to talk about anymore. He's got RFK, who has personally experienced the full weight of the criminal and the terrible behavior of the Democratic Party. And he has a lot more credibility in that aspect than does Donald Trump. And I suspect that Trump will take advantage of that.
That's what I think is important. He can say the same things that Republicans have said, but suddenly maybe they ring differently. What did he say? I thought particularly, I was fascinated by his indictment and devotion of time to the Ukraine war. And I was curious, Dave, about your perspective there. But he's really come out. I mean, you see, as you say, Sarah, you need to silence the smart guy. If he was a screwball, they would have put him right out in front all along.
Sure.
And now he used this huge moment, perhaps the most ears he's ever spoken to indict the Democrats on their true corruption. I mean, it was shocking in its freshness of truth telling. And he actually called her speech. He specifically said that she gave a bellicose, belligerent speech. He, in essence, said, you're going to have more of the same corruption and the same destruction of America on these three areas of existential threat, with which I agree with Orange Man. But like Dave is pointing out, it's coming from somebody who is a Kennedy, who is an icon. And many people will say, well, maybe I just shouldn't discredit him solely for the vaccines and his opposition to Big Pharma. Maybe he's got something to say. I think it really does blunt their effort to just go to truths like lawfare and corruption. And I'm really excited to hear it. And I wonder if mainstream media will keep going.
I think we've got to acknowledge that he's not anti-vax. He's more of a controlled how you go through a vaccination program, especially for children. And when you get 8 shots a day in a tiny baby, that could be a problem. The other thing is, I think that he is concerned about was the COVID vax, because it came out of nowhere and people were just forced. You lose your job if you don't get a vaccination. And I don't think that was fair to call him an anti-vax nut.
Well,
you
I
know
think
what?
what the Democrats try to do often is they try to marginalize their opponents and say, they're a little, not with
Wackadoodle.
it or wackadoodle. Right, exactly. And that's what they did with Kennedy. But he's a pretty intelligent guy.
Very
And
smart.
whether you agree with his stuff or don't agree with it, he's a thinking person. And he obviously does not appreciate the way the Democratic Party is going, which is he's saying it's very undemocratic.
I think
Well, it is.
also he's bringing up a whole issue. One of the things that an independent candidate can do that the major party candidates usually can't, because they have to stick to the mainstream issues of the economy and defense and the border and those sort of basics. But one of the things an independent candidate can do is introduce an issue that nobody else is talking about. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is uniquely positioned to do that because of the length of time he has spent on the issue of chronic disease and the issue of dependence on vaccinations and the health crisis that we have in this country that's gone under the radar that neither candidate, neither Biden nor Harris nor Trump have talked about or been able to bring to the fore. Well, let me tell you, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. will do that. And if he is actually named, for example, HHS secretary in Trump's cabinet, I think that the Washington permanent bureaucracy should rightly be trembling in their boots.
I think
Yeah,
that's right. I understand where Kennedy is coming from on his stance with Ukraine. The best of all plans executed poorly is going to be, criticized. When you think about what happened, and people forget, I mean, it's almost, 2 3/4 years ago. It's history. But when the Russians first in 2021, in March, lined up on the border, Zelensky said they're going to invade us, but there were only 60,000, and that couldn't possibly be an invasion. So then they start to build that up. In June, we have the first summit between Putin and Biden. Up until that point, Biden was saying, well, maybe we ought to give them some offensive, some lethal weapons. And so he did. Sparsely, but nonetheless, he did. After that summit, he stopped that. He stopped lethal aid to Ukraine. He did not restart it again until October, November. Had that continued, because he believed Putin. I mean, he didn't read Putin's manifesto. I doubt that anybody in his administration read it. Putin told you exactly what he was going to do. And remember, when a country leader tells you what they're going to do, believe them. They probably will.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because in Harris's
Those
speech,
curling.
she saved probably some of her most powerful rhetoric for the Ukraine-Russian war, and how she was very forceful about it. I was kind of shocked.
Well, as a Democrat, you're forced to say anything that makes it look like you hate Vladimir Putin. And the easiest way to do that is to say you're in favor of arming Ukraine to the hilt. Democrats seem to love that. It's another one of those good wars that they support, like in Afghanistan. Remember, they were opposed to the Iraq war, but Afghanistan was good. That was the good war.
Right. Obama said that.
Not right. Right.
But look how they framed this now.
But you also can't discount in all of this the timing of this. I mean, this wasn't in September, October. It wasn't 3 months ago when he realized he wasn't going to win. It's the day after the Democratic National Convention, designed obviously and specifically to take the Kamala momentum and bring it to a screeching halt.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what he accomplished today. So once again, these Democrats that thought that suing people, trying to kick them off the ballot and using all these undemocratic methods of trying to ram their way into power or remaining in power, they've all backfired on them. And if they lose, if Harris loses in November, I should say, there's going to be a serious look at who decided on the strategy of suing Trump up and down and east and west, north and south, a strategy that backfired, I think, more famously than any strategy I've seen in my lifetime.
Absolutely.
They were
mean,
just
the
adding
same
gas
thing to
to the
Kennedy.
dumpster fire.
Same thing to Kennedy.
Well,
And
and
now
and
that's
Kennedy-
coming back on them.
Kennedy just framed Ukraine in a different way than the Democrats like to, though. In addition, I get your points, Dave, but what did he say? He said that the neocons are dominating the Democrats, the warmongers, and the defense industry, and that they put too much pressure through NATO on Russia's borders, and that Russia could have responded differently, but that they literally caused the war. They then pointed out that we threw in our puppet takeover of Ukraine against those people's will to, again, serve the military-industrial complex, and that Biden had at least 2 opportunities to end the conflict. He could have done it easily, but he wouldn't. And I saw that happen myself, too, and thought that was pretty telling. Are Democrats in America going to start questioning this patriotic framing of Ukraine and start listening to somebody like a Kennedy, who has long fought and opposed the military-industrial complex that I think is maybe influencing a lot of our politics? He was really going out against the cabal of the. I mean, he's attacking neocons while attacking the Democrats. Are they in bed together, or are they not liberals anymore, as Tim points out?
Yeah.
So I really think that it does a lot more damage coming out of his mouth and really calling out some truths that our mainstream media do not want heard. And this is a tremendous impact on the conversation for Americans.
I'm wondering
Okay.
to what extent the elite media can just try to ignore this. I mean, they'll try to do the best they can. They'll marginalize Kennedy. They'll call him a kook. They'll say nobody takes him seriously. He's an anti-vax fanatic, all of this stuff. Or they might just try to minimize it and put it as the last story on the nightly news or page 16 in the New York Times to try and bury it so a lot of people aren't even aware. I'm curious as to the degree of success they will have with that inevitable strategy.
Well, you know, that Elon Musk changed the whole dynamic because there were 500,000 people, according to Sarah, waiting for Kennedy on X, waiting for Kennedy's speech. So you can't, you know, when you have X, you can't really shut down the dialogue.
You can't shut down all of it, at least.
Now, I'm interested, does anybody here, maybe Tim, you know, what states are particularly interested in Kennedy? You know, I mean, was it Michigan? Is it Pennsylvania? Where does he poll the best?
I know he has polled particularly well in Arizona.
Oh, okay.
And I think also in Pennsylvania.
Those are
But
battles.
those don't quote me on that. But he has pockets of support, but his support is more like 5% here, 5% there, more than, say, being concentrated in one area of the country.
In the battleground states, his polling is between 4.7 and about 5.4 across the board. And what that means in terms of real votes is you'll think, well, oh my gosh, what is that? Between 12,000 and about 44,000 votes. But now consider how many states were lost by less than 10,000 votes.
Yeah.
In the last 2 elections.
That's right.
Essentially 50,000 votes that went the other way would have swung the 2016 election to Hillary Clinton and 2020 to Donald Trump.
So
That's how thin the margins are.
So we could be looking at a McGovern situation here?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. And But at the same time, Hubert Humphrey was pretty clever, and all of that was resolved right before the first vote in 1968.
I'm pretty sure Dave's a fanboy of Humphrey.
I was like, wow, we should have a special show on Hubert.
Well, maybe he
I'm
just
getting-
has fond memories of when Democrats actually loved the country.
That's right. I think that
Or at
and-
least
and they
acted
were-
like it.
yeah, well,
Acted like-
and,
well,
and they
yeah.
were they were gentlemen and gentleladies, and they could disagree with you, but still go out to dinner with you and have a wonderful time and be collegial. And that's just almost next to not.
That wasn't that long ago that when I was in my political operative world, we hung out with the same staffers in different parties all the time. And we all laughed about it and joked about it. And we'd get together for dinner. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. We all knew the job that had to be done. We didn't divulge secrets or anything, but we all got along. Nobody gets along today.
Yeah.
I wonder too, I have no knowledge of this. It's mere speculation, but you'd think that it might have come up, that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Donald Trump share something else, which is assassination. I mean, this, would
Makes sense.
forever tarnish the psyche of Robert F. Kennedy to see his father gunned down 5
Right.
years after his uncle was gunned down. And Donald Trump barely escaped the same fate. So you'd think that
And
perhaps
then he
there
was
was a little
denied
bit of
Secret Service protection too.
simpatico there.
for a
And
year.
yes, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. This was inexplicable to me, that being denied Secret Service protection. You've got to think that stuck in RFK's craw more than anything else, considering his family's history. It's just downright cruel.
It was
So-
costing
Well,
him money, Tim. He had to pay for his own security. It was costing
Right.
him half of what he collected. That's part of why they did it. He
Well,
saw how evil they were. Sorry, Dave.
so one of the things, what clearly, Sirhan was the shooter, and even that at that time there was considerable conspiracy theories that the Democratic Party, the mainstream Democratic Party, the LBJ Democratic Party, basically dissed themselves from RFK Sr., and that because of that, there was a lot of animosity. And I don't know what, in fact, even today, the only real unnecessary fact that I know was that the prosecutor of Sirhan was Buck on we were brothers, but help me with it. What's the television program with oh my gosh, my brain just went. At any rate, with
Wish I could help.
yeah, thank you. A Band of Brothers. Oh my
Band of
God.
Yes, of
Brothers.
course.
There we go.
That's it.
Woo! That
I
took a
know.
minute. That took
It's
a
always
minute.
trivia time.
And-
Hubert
and-
Humphrey. Hubert Humphrey.
Yeah, right. And so Yeah.
Hubert Horatio
Yo,
Humphrey.
Humphrey.
so for
You have
what
to
it's
put the
worth,
Horatio in.
he was famous twice. At any rate, I think that RFK's dropping out actually tends to put the whole race at a different level. There are all kinds of things that both sides can do now that they were not necessarily free to do before. They can lump RFK in with Trump and smear them both. And,
Here's another. I'm sorry, Dave. Go ahead.
or they can, separate them. But then Trump can also say, you know what? I'm not going to allow them to do that. I'm going to bring RFK with me on the stump.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
another
Because
thing.
go ahead, let Kamala
Right.
Harris try to attack Robert F. Kennedy or any kind of Democrats.
Oh, she will.
There's enough
She will.
people that remember what the Kennedys meant to the Democratic Party.
Okay, but
Yeah.
it's interesting. He said that younger people really gravitate to him. These are
Yes.
people that didn't live through the JFK assassination, probably didn't live through the Bobby Kennedy
Right.
assassination, probably look at 1968 through the lens of documentaries and, things like that. So they weren't around for this stuff, but they have gravitated to him. And
Well,
I think there
Yes.
is some kind of Kennedy charisma or something with the young people because
Kennedy charisma is it's innate apparently with all of them.
Yeah. Most of
But I also think, Lisa, that it's probable that it's just the anti-war that young people
yeah,
they have no desire to go
that's
on
a good
foreign
point.
shores
Yeah.
and kill people.
That's a
And
really
so I
good
think that's
point.
probably
Yeah.
one of the mainstays of why they like him. The other thing I think is notable that Kennedy and Trump have in common is neither one of them needed to run for president. They never thought they would. They were just good old American boys. And all of a sudden things started to get wacky. And that's where we got President Trump coming out of the woodwork. He didn't need to run for president. And RFK Jr. he didn't need to run either, but he saw his country kind of falling apart. And so you got to give credit there for both of them to go, ugh, I've got to give up my great life and try to do this because this is bad.
But I
This
think
country is in sorry shape.
It brings a guy to the forefront who had been buried. He had some, attendant publicity to a new announcement when he said he was running for president, but then he got buried underneath this extraordinary campaign with assassination attempts and botched debates and one candidate pulling out 3.5 months. I mean, all of this stuff is so unprecedented that it makes the word unprecedented almost meaningless
Right.
in the course of this campaign.
We're using it way too much anymore, but it does seem to apply.
It does reintroduce the RFK Jr. agenda, the agenda of peace, of healthier food, of transparency in government.
Yeah, there's no doubt that this changes the race.
These are the things. He will now have a platform to speak about these things, and these things appeal to young people. Lisa, you're right. They absolutely do, and it kind of brings back, it seems to me, some of the young people that might be superficially at least attracted to Kamala Harris just because she's different.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think having seen, in speaking to Lisa's point about young people, I've been to a couple of events and I've met RFK. And as a lawyer, I've been impressed by what a great speaker is. His speaking mannerism are good, but his mastery of the facts and the law, he did it today. He can rattle off the facts and he can back it up. And when he talks about vaccines, no, he's not anti-vax. He's anti-experimental vax. He's anti-unlimited immunity for big pharma. Young people, I think, are drawn to him because of several factors. One is he's actually radical. He's actually an anti-establishment person who's fighting against both traditional parties. I've been looking for that candidate since I was 16. That's what I was hoping for in Perot and others.
That's what I like about him too.
Yeah.
But he's also something that's so rare in our political sphere, which is authentic. And that's actually whether you like Trump or not, that's why people are drawn to him. He's crusty and he's not polished, but he is finally just somebody. Tell me what you really believe. And this is an incredible contrast for the Democrats. And so I actually think there are a lot of young people. This is hopeful, and this is going to impact our relationship, our elections, because there are a lot of young people who are not beguiled by the mainstream media lies. They are looking at their food supplies. They are looking at big pharma, and they are looking at the Democratic Party in these wars with a critical eye. And he serves them, and I hope he continues to.
To that point that you made about Kennedy and young people, he has an appeal that goes beyond what either of the other candidates can really offer. And to the point about him being authentic. I was just about to make the same point. You're absolutely right. The authenticity is absolutely there. But I think there's something else there that comes through with him. And this doesn't matter whether you like all of his policies or none of them. And that is honesty. This guy, at least to me, disagree with me if you will, but this guy comes across as honest as the day is long. And
trustworthy.
And deadly serious about what he believes in.
And smart. I mean,
principled.
the guy is smart. Yeah.
Now contrast that with Kamala.
Well,
I think the contrast actually
cricket
just
button I
makes
can hit.
You know, do we
so
know?
bad.
Do we know? I mean, that's the question. We don't know much about her. We hear a lot of tropes and tricks, as Oprah
We
would
know
say.
all we need to know.
But
Too much.
you know, I don't think we
We
really
know
know
all
who
we
she
need to
is,
know.
or what
Yeah, I
she
agree with
believes,
you.
or what she wants to push.
They're
So
trying
there
to
are-
recreate her. That's
yeah.
why.
Once she announced that she supports, Venezuela Soviet-style price controls, which will create food shortages and send the price of food soaring and bankrupt the economy. It happens every time it's tried. And that's the one policy she's talked about. So look, that and her pick of Tim Walz, a far left governor of Minnesota, those are the only two decisions she's made so far, which I talked about before. And that tells you everything you need to know about where she is. What more would you need to know?
I would like a go back. Actually, two go backs.
Are you doing something
double
over, or just gonna go back to a topic?
Oh, he wants a double go back. That's like a double secret probation.
Two things that we were picking up on this notion of young people and how young people were not engaged, and that so Kennedy was this new face, and he was somebody that they could be engaged with. So on 9/10/2001, we would be saying the same thing. On 9/12, not so much, because you had lines for young people to sign up to be in the military. Because the United States was facing the two things that motivate any government to do anything, and that's crisis and late to need.
Mm-hmm.
The second point that I would make is that Kennedy, I think, misinterpreted what he was saying. He said what he was saying, and it was correct. The facts were facts. He said in the same time period, Ross Perot had 32 major network interviews. He had one. Do you know why? Because the networks even then had chosen Clinton over Bush. And that's why they chose Ross Perot as the spoiler and gave him as much airtime as they could. They have not changed their stripes. They are the very same that we've always hated. And, we're not looking at the Edward R. Murrows anymore.
Well, the Democrats will say they've already said it, that this just proves that all along Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has been nothing more than a stalking horse for Trump. That he entered the race at Trump's insistence, backed by Trump supporters, Trump money, so he could get in and divide the Democrats and send Trump back to the White House. Okay, so they'll say, see, this is all part of this plan to divide the Democratic Party. And he knew that if he couldn't win, which he knew right away he couldn't, he would simply shift his support over to Trump. So, they're trying to say this was basically a secretive conspiracy to have RFK Jr. enter the race just for the benefit of Trump, so that at a point just like this, RFK could reveal his true colors. That's
think,
the Democrat
yeah.
conspiracy theory here.
I think that
Ridiculous.
I think you don't have to have a conspiracy theory. I think you can have here are the facts, and that is that the the media that we call the mainstream media, they make decisions about how they want what they want to see as outcomes. They then craft their world to ensure that those outcomes come to pass. They did not want George H.W. Bush to be president. They loved the I feel your pain Clinton. They wanted Clinton. And woe and behold, you have Ross Perot to be the spoiler, and he took the votes from Bush and gave Clinton the presidency. They see this.
I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that, Dave.
Well, he got 20% of the vote. I mean,
right, but he got it from both parties.
Well, I think
there are a lot of people that didn't. A lot of Democrats didn't like Clinton.
I thought he was a hillbilly.
Yeah,
I mean, the conventional wisdom is that Ross Perot cost him that race. But, you can go back to, Dave, to follow that sort of thread or theory. You could go back to 1980 when John Anderson entered as a third-party candidate against Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan. And you could say, well, he was put in as a liberal Republican that Democrats who didn't like Carter could vote for, drain votes from Reagan, split the Republican vote, and give Carter the election. But I think what that proved is you got to have the goods. And in Jimmy Carter, they just didn't have the goods.
Well, in every election, they say this is the biggest election of our lives. But I really think it may be this time around, between the assassination attempt, between Biden dropping out, between Kennedy aligning with Trump. We are not short of things to write about, things to talk about. And as part of what Kennedy called the alternative media, I hope we have been doing just that for our readers, viewers, and listeners at Liberty Nation.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Lisa, I was on the phone for a very long time this morning to get RFK to drop out just so you could say that.
Thank you.
Never. The tentacles of Dave Patterson spread far and wide.
Well, whatever else happens, and I actually am involved with his campaign here in Vermont just to get him on the ballot, and a lot of young people are in it. And I've actually been trying to get some actual inside info, which we may get. But whatever else happens out of today, we're not looking at that spoiler issue anymore. He himself saw that he could be blamed for that. And I think all of us were anxious about that because that's almost impossible to read those tea leaves. He could have spoiled it either way. Now we got a pure dichotomy of choice. No Ross Perot, no John Anderson. So I think that may be, that is going to reshape the field. And as David has pointed out, that may shift the strategies and tactics we see out of the parties as well.
Yeah.
All right, guys. I guess it's time to wrap it up. And I've enjoyed this discussion. And I think RFK Jr. really kind of deserved what we gave him today. And we have all on this channel on libertynation.com at Liberty Nation News, we have always given everybody a fair shake. So I appreciate this today. And I think that our listeners will too, pointing out the good, the bad, and the indifferent. So that's it for our live conservative 5-panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform, YouTube, Vimeo, sorry about that, Rumble, and of course X. We're on them all. I think I've talked too much. As well, Liberty Nation News has its own Roku and Amazon Fire channels where you can see all of our TV productions. I'm your host, Sarah Cowgill. Thanks for joining us today for Free Thinking, Free Speech, LibertyNation.com.